Kenya has relentlessly expressed its wish to transform the country into a first-world economy, or at least follow the path of these great nations. As of the 2025 to 2026 estimates, Kenya's nominal GDP is approximately 136 to 141 billion US dollars, placing it firmly among Africa's mid-sized economies rather than at the margins. Government revenue remains in the range of 27 to 30 billion annually, while public debt stands at roughly 85 to 90 billion, which, really constrains aggressive deficit-financed expansion. GDP per capita is now closer to 2,200, meaning Kenya must still at least double to triple productivity per person to approach upper middle income thresholds. Any first-world discussion that does not begin with these constraints is honestly unserious, because transformation must come from reallocation and multiplication of existing flows, not speculative capital. Before we proceed, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. The first reform must be a forced redirection of capital into tradable production, because Kenya already has money, but it circulates poorly. Big commercial banks such as KCB Group, Equity Bank, Cooperative Bank, and NCBA now collectively hold loan books exceeding $45 billion, yet less than 15% of this credit goes to manufacturing. A targeted industrial credit program, redirecting even 5 to 6 billion over 5 years into export-oriented manufacturing, would immediately alter GDP composition. Historical multipliers from Malaysia and Vietnam show that every $1 invested in tradable manufacturing generates $1.40 to $1.70 in GDP over a decade. So, a redirection of $5 to $6 billion could plausibly add $8 to $10 billion to GDP, and that pushes Kenya toward $145 to $150 billion without any new sovereign debt. That capital, honestly, must be redirected into energy and industrial infrastructure, because that's really where Kenya continues to lose competitiveness. Industrial electricity costs still average 18 to 22 cents per kilowatt hour, which is pretty high compared to the 8 to 12 cents seen during Southeast Asia's industrial takeoff. Kenya spends over $2.5 billion every year on energy imports, inefficiencies, and power losses. Redirecting $3 to $4 billion into grid stability, geothermal expansion, and industrial rate power contracts would, without a doubt, materially reduce production costs. Besides, empirical evidence shows that a 20 to 25% reduction in industrial energy costs raises manufacturing output by 10 to 15%, which translates, conservatively, into $5 to $7 billion in additional GDP, given Kenya's larger base. Once production capacity has been established, logistics now becomes the main binding constraint. Kenya's ports, roads, and customs inefficiencies still impose hidden costs estimated at 7 to 9% of trade value. The Port of Mombasa now handles trade flows exceeding $35 billion annually. Reducing logistics friction by 25% through digitized customs clearance, rail prioritization, and selective private concessions would unlock $3 to $4 billion in additional trade throughput per year. Trade to GDP elasticity suggests this alone could lift GDP by $4 to $5 billion, compounding earlier gains and pushing national output toward $155 billion. The next step is value capture, and it's important to note that this is not about volume. Kenya exports tea, coffee, horticulture, and minerals largely unprocessed. Tea exports generate approximately $1.4 to $1.5 billion annually, yet domestic processing could actually double margins without increasing acreage. If Kenya processed even half of its major agricultural exports domestically, incremental export earnings could rise by somewhere between $4 and $6 billion every year. This approach, by the way, really mirrors the path taken by countries like Thailand and Malaysia, and honestly, it would push GDP toward $160 billion while directly boosting rural incomes. However, none of this actually works without human capital that's aligned to production, not just generalized education expansion. Redirecting about $1 to $1.2 billion each year from inefficient subsidies and low-impact programs into technical training that's tied directly to industrial parks. Well, that would really raise labor productivity. Evidence from East Asia, for instance, shows productivity gains of 20 to 30% when vocational systems are integrated with firms. If this is applied to Kenya's expanded manufacturing base, it could generate an additional $3 to $4 billion in output within a decade. All right, now let's compound our analysis. Manufacturing expansion, cheaper energy, efficient logistics, value addition, and skilled labor all reinforce each other. With these systems in place, Kenya's sustainable growth rate could rise from about 5% to 7.5% or even 8%. At 8% growth, GDP doubles roughly every 9 years. Starting from a base of about $138 to $140 billion, Kenya could realistically reach between $200 and $220 billion in the next 6 to 10 years. That is, if we maintain persistent productivity. The funding process, also requires a comprehensive analysis. The money, well, it comes from redirected domestic credit, public-private infrastructure finance, export earnings, and retained value, and of course that endless cycle of external borrowing. Kenya already possesses the economic power needed to take the next leap, but honestly, the major constraint is execution discipline, mainly because of the numerous fraud cases that keep popping up. Feel free to share your insights, and once again, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.